Hello, my vulnerable population is veterans. This is Kendra Hawker, and I'll be presenting this today. Health disparities of veterans kind of vary. They're a huge group and encompass a lot of different smaller minority groups. And so a lot of those smaller minority groups have more specific health disparities. But one that really impacts veterans overall is mental health troubles. And we'll explore that a little bit more further on. The veteran population in Weber County is nearly 14,000, and that was from the census from between 2015 and 2019. And in Utah, it's nearly 144,000. In the United States, we have about 18 million veterans, and that includes those that are living internationally in other countries. But there's no information on veterans worldwide. We don't really keep track of veterans from other countries. Utah hosts about 6.5%. Alaska hosted the most, and New York was the least. But Utah was on the lower end of those percentages. And after exploring some different reasonings why, there's a socially conservative lifestyle and culture in Utah that could definitely contribute, as many veterans don't participate in that kind of culture. And there's only one active duty base here, Hill Air Force Base up in Layton. So both of those things could contribute to our lower percentage of veterans that live here. Social determinants of health are from Healthy People 2030. I decided that veterans had maybe trouble with healthcare access and quality. Lots of veterans are treated through the VA, the Veterans Affairs hospitals, but in 2018, the Office of Inspector General, which is part of the healthcare system for veterans, posted a news announcement that the hospitals for the VA are incredibly understaffed, so that can absolutely contribute to some poor social determinants of health and poor access to good quality healthcare for veterans. A lot of veterans are also treated by community providers, so those community providers don't necessarily know the military-related troubles that veterans have faced in the past and how they differ from civilians. 3 specific concerns for veterans. They were found to be at a higher percentage of having traumatic brain injuries related to their time in the military. There's an underuse of the VA healthcare system in the United States as well. Less than half of all veterans are enrolled in the VA. And PTSD, I think, is the biggest one for veterans, and it's, of course, the one we all think of when we think of veterans, too. In the general population, it was found to be around 7 to 8% people experience PTSD, but in veterans, it was found to be between 11 and 20%, and up to 30% for Vietnam veterans. Those poor Vietnam vets are having a hard time with PTSD. Some causes about these concerns. Coping mechanisms in the military are taught to, care for others above yourself, and to not seek medical attention because that could get you in trouble with your active duty. So there's definitely a stigma surrounding that in this culture, and it's causing troubles for us. For Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it of course definitely varies for the minority groups within this population. Generally, we're seeing veterans meeting physiological and safety needs. Most of the time, the military sets them up fairly well after they get out to have good experience, and as long as they've been moderately responsible with their money, they have, and they're set up okay for those types of things. But belongingness and love could start to be where we have some trouble, especially if we're suffering from things like PTSD and other mental illnesses that can affect them. Generally, this population is able to function relatively well. Like I said, the military sets them up fairly well for life back into the regular world. But there's definitely outliers in this group. Those that live in rural areas don't have as much access to healthcare, and those that are severely impacted by their mental health can find to function a little bit less. Health outcomes are generally similar to others in their same demographic group. Just because they're a veteran doesn't mean they have different health outcomes most of the time. Communicable diseases for veterans show that the studies show that there's not really anything. There's really no studies showing communicable diseases specifically for veterans. It's about the same as any kind of community spread, but there's subgroups of this population, the minority groups like the homeless veterans, that may be at increased risk for other things that would be more associated with homelessness rather than their veteran status. Non-communicable diseases, this one was kind of interesting. Of course, mental illnesses, so depression and PTSD, are found to be higher rates in the veteran population. Chronic pain, complications from exposure to hazardous chemicals. We think of Agent Orange when we talk about this. Military personnel just have different exposures to different things than we would in any other realm. And PTSD has actually been linked to an increased risk in heart disease of men and women. So that's kind of an interesting thought. This rate could be decreased by decreasing the stigma surrounding mental health and shifting that culture into caring more for themselves rather than putting everybody else in front of them. As far as self-care and self-harm go for veteran populations, veterans compose about 22% of the total number of suicides per year, which is an insane amount, and PTSD has found to be primarily the root cause of this. McKinney did a study kind of on how PTSD relates to suicide and why so many veterans with PTSD are attempting or completing suicide. And she discussed the management of internal symptoms, this internal hostility and depression that they find. There's, of course, external symptoms, the anger, the lashing out, having trouble coping with loud noises or things like that, different triggers. But this management of internal symptoms is kind of where we can find some resolution for decreasing the rate of suicide. And she found that cognitive processing theory can help a lot with these symptoms, which is a form of therapy. Harming others. This one was kind of interesting to learn about as well. PTSD on its own is not a risk factor for violence, but it's other things that go along with PTSD that can lead to behaviors that increase violence. And reading the studies very carefully is important when researching this. PTSD can lead to things like alcohol abuse that have a higher risk for violence against others. So overall, there's maybe a small increase in risk of harming others, but overall, it's more related to problems associated with PTSD rather than PTSD itself. List of references. Thank you so much.